Tonight, a family is devastated after losing 8 children in the mass shooting on Sunday. And now family members are revealing the troubling circumstances they say led up to the murders. NBC6's Maya Alicia shares their story.
8 children gone in one morning after police say Shamarr Elkins opened fire inside a West 70.
12 hours later, 8 children were dead. Let that number sit for a moment. 8 children. The youngest was 3 years old. Nobody on that block went to bed afraid that night. Nobody bolted their door with Shamarr Elkins on their mind. Why would they? He had just waved at Freddie. He was joking around with his brother-in-law Troy Brown at 9 o'clock that evening, laughing, moving cars around outside, acting like a man without a single dark thought behind his eyes. Troy worked the night shift. He kissed his family, said his goodbyes, and drove away into the dark. His nephew Mark Aiden was asleep inside that house. 10 years old. Troy left without a second thought because there was no reason, no visible reason, to have one. Earlier that same evening, Elkins had taken his eldest daughter to dinner. He posted a photo. Smiling. Laughing emojis in the caption. A father and his child, sharing a meal, frozen in a moment that looked like love and nothing else. That was April 18, 2026. The divorce court date was the next morning.
Family members are sharing what they say was happening inside the home before the incident.
So I know that there was some infidelity she didn't necessarily express it to me, but I do know that she came to me and she asked me about helping her properly file for a divorce.
April 20th, Monday. 7 hours away from the moment Troy Brown pulled out of that driveway. The papers were already signed. The marriage was already over in every way except the one that gets recorded by the state. And Shamarr Elkins already knew exactly what he was going to do about it. That is the thing about this case that makes it so hard to sit with. It was not impulsive. It was not a man who snapped in a single, terrible second. The smiling dinner photo and the waving at neighbors and the joking with Troy at 9 o'clock, none of that was a man unraveling in real time. It was a man who had already made his decision and was moving through his final hours with something close to calm. HI viewers, before we go any further, this story raises a question a lot of people find themselves split on. Do you think the people closest to Shamarr Elkins? His family, his co-workers, the people in that house that night could have seen this coming? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments. The morning of April 19, 2026. West 79th Street and Harrison Street, Shreveport, Louisiana. 2 addresses. 1 block apart. 2 families. 8 children who had gone to sleep the night before with no reason to be afraid.
Place again. There are 8 children that are deceased. I can't be strong for you.
Tragedy strikes Shreveport. 8 children killed in a mass shooting and 2 women fighting to survive after police say Shamarr Elkins, the gunman, opened fire on the children and the 2 women.
You could see in his eyes, nothing.
The first call to dispatch came in at 5:55 a.m. But the story does not begin at 5:55 a.m. It begins on Harrison Street. Before the sun was fully up. Before most of Shreveport had opened its eyes. It begins at Christina Snow's front door and the sound of knocking. Troy Brown found out what happened the way people find out about things they were standing right next to. A phone call. The details arriving in pieces, none of them making sense at first, and then all of them making a terrible kind of sense at once. His nephew Mark Aiden was among the dead. The boy he had left sleeping. The boy he had said goodnight to without knowing it was goodbye. And Freddie Montgomery, the neighbor who waved, the man who got that last ordinary image of Shamarr Elkins standing on the block like any other man on any other evening, Freddie Montgomery had no way of knowing, when he lifted his hand in a simple, neighborly gesture, that the man waving back had already written the ending. That is the question this case keeps returning to. Not just who. Not just how. But when. When exactly did this become inevitable? And was there ever a moment when someone with the right information, in the right position, could have pulled it back from the edge? To answer that, you have to go further back than April 18th. Further back than January. all the way back to Cedar Grove, North Shreveport, and a boy the system got its hands on early and never quite let go. Cedar Grove is not the kind of neighborhood that makes the news for good reasons.
Shayla Elkins, who remains hospitalized after being shot 9 times, had been seeking an end to the relationship with Elkins before Sunday morning shooting, and Crystal Brown, a cousin, says he didn't respond well. For this family, the tragedy runs even deeper. The victim's uncle says this is not the first time violence has affected the family. The 2 surviving sisters, Shayla Elkins and Keosha Pugh, previously dealt with their mother being shot.
It sits in the northern stretch of Shreveport, Louisiana, and it has always carried the particular weight that comes with being a place people are trying to get out of, not into. This is where Shamarr Elkins was born on December 7, 1994. And this is where, 31 years later, everything ended. His beginning was hard before he ever had a say in it. His biological mother, Jayla Elkins, was a teenager when he was born. She was struggling with crack addiction. She could not raise him. That fact, that single, foundational fact, shaped the entire architecture of who Shamarr Elkins would become, because it meant that from the very start, he was being raised by someone else, in circumstances he never chose, inside a system that would leave marks on him long before he ever left marks on anyone else. The woman who stepped in was Betty Walker. She was not his mother by blood. She was a family friend. But she was the one who raised him, the one who gave him structure, the one he came back to when things got hard. She was, by every account, his real foundation. And she loved him. That part matters. Because the people who love someone the most are often the ones least able to see what that person is becoming. He enlisted in the Louisiana Army National Guard at 18. That is the age when young men from neighborhoods like Cedar Grove often make one of 2 choices. And the Guard felt like the right one. He trained as a signal support systems specialist and a fire support specialist. Those are not casual designations. Signal support means operating under pressure with precision. Fire support means understanding weapons, coordinating their use, working within systems that are built around the application of force. He spent 7 years in the Guard. He never deployed. He exited as a private, the lowest enlisted rank. 7 years of service and he left at the same grade he started. There is a story inside the detail that the military records do not fully tell. What is known is this: when he came out, there was no documented transition support. No bridge back to civilian life. He came home to Cedar Grove, went to work driving for UPS, and started building 2 separate lives with 2 separate families within a single city block. His co-worker Willie Vasher later described him to reporters as a devoted family man. And Vasher believed that. The people around Elkins at work believed that. But Vasher also noticed something else. Something he likely filed away without fully understanding what it meant. Elkins had developed a bald spot. Not from age. Not from genetics. From stress. He was pulling his own hair out, strand by strand, during his shifts at UPS. His own body was broadcasting something his words never said out loud. Nobody asked him about it directly. That is the kind of detail that stays with you after something like this. Not because it was someone's fault, but because it was sitting right there, visible and real, and the language to respond to it just was not present in the room. He had 2 households running at the same time. His current wife, Shayla Pugh, lived on West 79th Street. They had 4 children together. His ex-wife, Braylin Snow, lived 1 block away on Harrison Street. They had 3 children together. 2 families. 1 man. 1 block. The financial pressure alone was significant. But the emotional architecture of that situation, 2 women, 7 children, 2 households, in the same neighborhood, with a divorce already filed, that was something the people around him were only beginning to fully understand. Then there was the record. In 2016, Elkins was charged with driving while intoxicated. A crack in the surface. Not unusual enough to set off alarms on its own. But it was the beginning of a paper trail that should have told a story, if anyone had ever read the whole document at once. 3 years later, in 2019, the paper trail got darker. Elkins pulled out a 9mm handgun near Caddo Magnet High School and fired 5 rounds at a vehicle. Children were outside when he did it. He pleaded guilty to illegal use of a weapon and received 18 months of probation.
And it was actually the same month, probably like 20 years ago, a crossfire. And now they got to relive this same tragedy, 20 years ago with their kids.
And embedded inside that conviction was a legal consequence that should have followed him like a locked door for the next decade. He was legally prohibited from possessing any firearm until 2029. Not 2026. Not the day he decided he needed one. 2029. That 2019 conviction was a hard legal wall between Shamarr Elkins and any firearm. On April 19, 2026, he had 2. How he got those weapons is a federal case now. But the more urgent question, the one his own family was living inside without knowing it, was a threat he made in 2023. One that nobody ever reported. One that was about to come due. It happened in 2023. Pugh told him she was thinking about leaving. His response was not a breakdown. It was not a plea. It was a statement. Flat, direct, and precise. He told her he would end her life, end the children's lives, and end his own if she ever tried to walk away. Those were the terms he laid out. Not in the heat of an argument that spiraled and dissolved. He said it, and he meant it to be heard. Betty Walker was present when those words were spoken. She told people later that she believed he was joking. That it was not something she took as a genuine declaration. She had known him since he was a child. She had watched him grow up. She could not reconcile the boy she raised with the words she had just heard, so she filed them under "not serious" and moved on. Pugh stayed. In April of 2024, they got married. The threat was still there, underneath everything, unrecorded and unreported, buried under wedding photos and the ordinary forward motion of a life that looked, from the outside, like it was holding together. It was not holding together. Pugh eventually filed for divorce. Infidelity was cited as the reason, confirmed later by Troy Brown in a CNN interview. Whatever the specific details of that breakdown, the legal machinery had been set in motion. A court date was scheduled. Monday, April 20, 2026. The morning after. What Pugh could not have fully known, what none of them could have fully known, is what the research on intimate partner violence says about moments exactly like that one. A pre-separation death threat is not an expression of frustration. It is not hyperbole. Among researchers who study lethal domestic violence, a specific threat made before a separation. One that names the victim, names the children, names the person making it, is one of the strongest predictors of actual lethal violence that exists in the literature. It is not a cry for help. It is a declaration of ownership. It is a man telling a woman, "You do not get to leave. I decide how this ends." Nobody had that framework in that room in 2023. So the threats sat in silence. January 2026. Elkins checked himself into a Veterans Affairs hospital in Shreveport. Betty Walker later confirmed this to the New York Times. He stayed for approximately 10 days following a suicide attempt. The VA stabilized him. The clinical team worked with him. And then they discharged him. Back to Cedar Grove. Back to West 79th Street. Back to a dissolving marriage and 2 households and financial pressure and a divorce court date that was now less than 4 months away. Back to the identical set of conditions that had brought him through the hospital doors in the first place. There is no public record of documented follow-up care. No record of a crisis management plan being handed off to anyone in his life. Troy Brown said he seemed better after he came home. Brown asked him at some point whether he felt like he needed to go back. Elkins said he was fine. That he would deal with it on his own. He would deal with it on his own. Easter Sunday, April 5, 2026. 14 days before the attack. Elkins called his biological mother, Mahalia, and his stepfather, Marcus Jackson. He was not calm on that call. He was crying. He told them Shinqua had filed for divorce.
Brown says the sisters are still hospitalized and are responsive and talking.
It's all so sad. Now, family members do say that Keosha Pugh, who is in the hospital, made a social media post apologizing to the kids, saying she is sorry she was unable to save them.
He said he was drowning in dark thoughts. Marcus Jackson tried to reassure him. Talked him through it the way a parent talks a child through pain. The call wound down. Before it ended, Elkins said something that Marcus Jackson would carry with him long after April 19th came and went. He said, "Some people don't come back from their demons." The call ended. No welfare check was requested. No crisis line was contacted. No one reached out to Shinqua. No one called the VA. The words dissolved into the air of an Easter Sunday and the world kept moving. Now step back and look at the full picture. A 2019 weapons conviction with a firearm prohibition through 2029. A January 2026 hospitalization following a suicide attempt. A pending divorce with a court date on the calendar. A 2023 death threat made in front of a witness that was never reported to law enforcement. And a phone call on April 5th in which he told his own parents he was drowning and that some people do not come back. 5 separate data points. 5 separate moments where a system, legal, medical, family, judicial, held a fragment of this picture. 5 moments where, if those fragments had ever been assembled into one complete image, the people with authority to intervene might have had something to work with. Not one of those systems ever saw the whole thing. And the man who put a weapon in Shamarr Elkins' hands, the man who handed a prohibited person the means to do what he did, was a 56-year-old convicted felon named Charles Ford. And when federal agents came to ask him about it, he lied. Twice. Before we get to the gun and how it moved, there is somewhere else the story has to go first. Back to the morning of April 19th. Back to Harrison Street. Because what happened on April 19th did not begin at West 79th Street. It began 1 block away, before Shreveport was awake, with a knock at Christina Snow's front door. Harrison Street first. Christina Snow was Elkins' ex-wife. She lived 1 block from Shinqua. She had 3 children with him. And on the morning of April 19th, 2026, she was the first person he came to. He knocked on her door before the city was fully awake. What happened inside that home in those first minutes is something investigators were able to reconstruct in precise detail, not because of surveillance footage, not because of witnesses, but because Christina Snow survived. She was shot 9 times. 9 separate times. And when it was over, when Elkins had taken her 3 children and walked out of that house, Christina Snow was still conscious. Still thinking. Still fighting. She used Siri to call 911. From the floor of her own home, shot 9 times, she gave investigators a coherent and detailed account of what had just happened. That account became one of the most significant pieces of information in the entire investigation. The fact that she survived it all, against every statistical probability, is something that defies easy explanation. She should not have lived through what happened to her that morning. But she did. And she made sure the world would know exactly what Elkins had done. After leaving Harrison Street, he drove to West 79th Street. Shanequa's house. The house where 4 of his children lived. The house where Shanequa's sister Keosha Pugh was also staying that night with her 12-year-old child. The attack at West 79th Street began while the children were still asleep. At 5:55 a.m., the first dispatch call came in. The caller was Keosha Pugh. She was on the roof of the house. She had gotten out through an upper window while the attack was still happening below her. She was calling 911 from the roof while the sounds of what was happening inside carried up through the structure of the building around her. Think about that for a moment. She was on the roof, calling for help, while it was still happening. At approximately 6 a.m., Keosha and her 12-year-old made the decision to jump from the roof. Both of them broke bones in the fall. Both of them survived. At 6:01 a.m., officers arrived on scene. Shreveport Police Department spokesperson Chris Bordelon later addressed the press and described what officers found inside that house. Most of the children had been targeted in the head. Most were still in the positions they had been in when they were asleep. There were bullet holes in the rear door of the home. Evidence that at least some of the children had tried to run. One child was found deceased on the back roof of the structure, the same roof Kosha and her daughter had just jumped from minutes before. That single detail about the back roof tells a story about the final seconds of a child's life that no one should have to sit with. But it is part of the record, and the record is what allows the full weight of this case to be understood. At 6:07 a.m. More than an hour after Kosha's first call, dispatch finally received the 911 call from Harrison Street. Christina's call. The one she made from the floor. The 1 mile and 1 block away. 6:10 a.m., dispatch connected the two locations. Officers at West 79th Street were now informed that Harrison Street was part of the same event. 6:20 a.m., officers learned that Christina Snow's 3 children, the ones Elkins had taken when he left Harrison Street, might still be in the vehicle he was driving. 6:40 a.m., the vehicle was located. It was empty. The children were not inside it. They were already gone. At 7:03 a.m., Shamarr Elkins was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of his death is still formally under investigation, complicated in part by a social media post made by a man named Michael Myans, identified in reporting as an alleged former Army mentor of Elkins, who claimed that Elkins had come to him before it was over, that they had spoken, and that Elkins had then taken his own life. Myans later deleted that post. The official determination has not been finalized. Now, the gun. The Mossberg rifle-style pistol. What law enforcement would classify as an assault pistol was traced by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The trace led back through the legal purchaser of the weapon. That purchaser identified Charles Ford. Charles Ford is 56 years old. He is a convicted felon. Under federal law, he was legally prohibited from possessing any firearm. He possessed one anyway, and he put it in the hands of another man who was also prohibited from possessing any firearm. When federal agents first questioned Ford, he denied it. Then he admitted it. He told investigators he had been keeping the Mossberg under the seat of his truck. He told them he believed Elkins had taken it from him at some point before April 19th. Believed. He believed Elkins had taken it. Charles Ford now faces federal charges for being a felon in possession of a firearm and for making false statements to federal law enforcement agents, the lies he told before he admitted the truth. He faces a potential sentence of up to 20 years. The full chain of custody for that weapon remains under active federal investigation. The origin of the second weapon, the small-caliber handgun, has not been publicly identified. 8 children were gone before the city finished waking up. 2 women, against every measurable probability, survived. And the question that everyone who ever knew Shamarr Elkins is now permanently living inside, the one that has no clean answer and never will, is whether any single moment in the years leading up to April 19th, if handled differently by the right person with the right information, could have changed what that Sunday morning became. The answer to that question lives in the space between 5 data points that were never connected and 4 investigations that are still open right now. Shreveport Police Chief Wayne Smith stood in front of cameras after the attack and said something that landed harder than almost anything else spoken publicly in the days that followed. He said that given everything they were learning about the history of this case, the chances were good that this was not the first time something like this had been reported in that household. He was not making an accusation. He was making an observation. And the observation was this. Something had been happening in that home long before April 19th, and the systems designed to catch it had not caught it. That statement opened a door that nobody in Shreveport wanted to walk through. Because if Chief Smith was right, and the evidence available suggests he was, then the full accounting for what happened on West 79th Street and Harrison Street is not just about one man and one morning. It is about a chain of missed connections stretching back years. It is about a firearms prohibition that existed on paper and nowhere else. It is about a VA hospitalization that ended without a documented handoff to anyone in Elkins' life. It is about a divorce proceeding that moved forward with no mechanism, none, for flagging that the respondent had a weapons conviction, a recent psychiatric hospitalization, and a pending court date he had already told people he could not live with. There is no federal requirement that family courts be notified when someone with an active firearms prohibition files or responds to a divorce. There is no automatic cross-agency alert when a veteran with a weapons conviction is discharged from inpatient psychiatric care back into an active domestic legal dispute. Those systems do not talk to each other. They did not talk to each other in this case. And 8 children paid the price of that silence. The policy questions this case forces into the open are not comfortable ones. Should there be mandatory lethality screening when a divorce is filed against someone with a documented weapons conviction? Should VA discharge protocols include mandatory notification to family court when the patient has an open legal matter involving the people they were hospitalized for threatening? Should firearms prohibition records be automatically cross-referenced with active divorce proceedings in real time? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the specific gaps that this case exposed. And they remain open not just in Louisiana, but nationally. For investigations are still active at the time this story is being told. The ATF's full firearms trace, the complete chain of custody for both weapons used that morning, is ongoing. The federal prosecution of Charles Ford is proceeding through the court system. The Louisiana State Police are conducting an officer-involved shooting inquiry into the circumstances of Elkins' death at the scene. And the Shreveport Police Department's own motive investigation, the full psychological and behavioral reconstruction of why this happened when it did and how it was planned, is not yet closed. Michael Myant's deleted social media post remains part of the open record in the death investigation. He claimed Elkins came to him, that they spoke, that Elkins then ended his own life. He deleted the post after it began circulating publicly. No official statement has been made about that claim. The cause of death at the scene has not been formally finalized. Both Christina Snow and Shamarr Pugh are still in recovery. 2 women who were each, in their own way, the intended final chapter of this story, and who refused to become it. The Louisiana Governor's Office announced that the state's foundation would cover the full cost of all 8 funerals. The Community Foundation of North Louisiana established survivor funds for the families left behind. Those are not small things. But they exist in a space that no fund and no gesture can fully reach, the space where 8 children used to be. Their names are Jayla Elkins. She was 3 years old. Shayla Elkins. She was 5. Braylin Snow. 5 years old. Caleb Pugh. 6. Braylin Snow. 6 years old. Layla Pugh. 7. Markaden Pugh. 10 years old. Shreveport Snow. 11. Say those names again, slowly. Jayla. Shayla. Braylin. Caleb. Kadarian. Layla. Markaden. Shreveport. 8 children who went to sleep on the night of April 18, 2026, with no reason to be afraid. 8 children who deserved every single year that was taken from them. The divorce court date came and went on Monday morning. The marriage ended the only way Shamarr Elkins ever said it would, on his terms, with everyone paying the price he set. The full accounting for what the systems around him missed is still being written. The investigations are still open. The families are still grieving. And the questions this case forces into the light about how we protect people who are living inside a threat that nobody has officially recorded are questions that do not have answers yet. But the names do not wait for answers. Jayla was 3 years old. And she deserved so much more than what April 19th gave her. This story is far from over. The federal prosecution of Charles Ford is moving through the courts right now, and what is emerging from that case, specifically who else may have known that weapon was accessible to a prohibited person, is something investigators have not yet said publicly. The next video covers that case in full, along with the complete ATF trace and a detail about the timeline of how that weapon moved from Ford to Elkins that has not been widely reported. If you think you already know how this piece of the story fits together, the next video will change that. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications on, because that one drops soon, and it is not something you want to come to late.